advised my transgender friend to hold off on coming out, but he refused. Now he's losing a $2.5 million inheritance. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't usually get 5:30 a.m. phone calls. Like, ever. My life isn't that dramatic. I'm just a regular 23-year-old woman trying to figure things out. Working part-time at a coffee shop, taking care of my little brother, and maybe thinking about going back to school. My days are a mix of caffeine, bills, and trying to keep my plants alive. So, when my phone started vibrating on my nightstand at the crack of dawn, my first thought was, who died? It was Arthur. And yeah, I picked up because that's what you do when your best friend calls you at an ungodly hour. For context, Arthur and I have been friends since we were 15. Back then, he hadn't transitioned yet, and honestly, I didn't even think twice when he came out to me at 19. Arthur was just Arthur. I've always been in his corner, even when his family wasn't. And oh boy, his family. Let me tell you, they're the worst. Like, if you Googled Southern Conservative Nightmare, you'd find their family portrait. They're super religious, super controlling, and just super awful about anything that doesn't fit their mold of perfect. They still call Arthur by his dead name and refuse to acknowledge him as a man. It's heartbreaking to watch, but Arthur's been playing the long game. See, his grandfather, who's apparently the only tolerable member of the family, left Arthur $2.5 million in his will. The catch? Arthur can only inherit it if he stays on good terms with the family until he turns 25. So Arthur's plan has always been to wait it out. Get the money, then cut ties and live his best life. Honestly, I thought it was a solid plan. I mean, $2.5 million is a lot of money. It's the kind of money that can change your life overnight. Pay off debts, buy a house, start a business, whatever you want. And for Arthur, who's never been great at managing his finances, it'd be a safety net he desperately needs. But this morning he sounded different, panicked. "I can't do this anymore, Eileen," he said before I even had the chance to grumble about the time. His voice cracked, and my stomach sank. "I'm so tired of pretending. I think I need to tell them. Like now." I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. "Arthur, it's 5:30 in the morning. What's going on? Did something happen?" "No, nothing happened. I can't keep lying about who I am. Every time I sit at their dinner table, every time I hear my mom call me her daughter, I feel like I'm suffocating. I know the plan was to wait, but I don't think I can anymore." Okay, so here's the thing about Arthur. He's impulsive. Like really impulsive. He once maxed out a credit card on a week-long trip to New York because he wanted to find himself. He ended up finding himself broke and stuck on my couch for 3 months. So, when he started talking about blowing up his entire inheritance plan, my first instinct was to pump the brakes. "Arthur," I said carefully, "I get it. I really do. But we've talked about this, right? The plan is to wait until you're 25. You've already made it this far. Just a little longer and then you'll have the money, and you can walk away from them for good." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, he said, "Do you think I'm a coward for waiting?" That caught me off guard. "What? No, of course not. You're being smart about this. It's not cowardly to prioritize your future. But it feels like I'm letting them win," he shot back, his voice rising. "Every time I bite my tongue, every time I let them misgender me, it feels like I'm giving them power over me. I'm so sick of it, Eileen. I'm sick of hiding. I don't care about the money anymore." And that's when the alarm bells really started going off in my head. Because I knew Arthur cared about the money. He talked about it all the time, how it was his ticket to freedom, how it would let him finally get top surgery, how he could move to a city where nobody knew his family's toxic baggage. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the life he'd been dreaming of since he was 19. So, for him to suddenly say he didn't care? Yeah, something was definitely up. "Arthur, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're tired, okay? You're emotional right now, and that's fine. But this isn't the time to make a big decision. Go back to sleep, and we'll talk about this later today. I'll come over and we'll figure it out. Together." But he wasn't having it. "You don't get it, Eileen," he snapped. "You've never had to hide who you are. You've never had to sit across from people who claim to love you while they tear you down piece by piece. You don't know what it's like to live like this. And ouch, that hit a nerve. Because no, I don't know what it's like to be trans or to have a family that actively hates who I am. But I do know what it's like to struggle, to feel trapped in a situation you can't escape from. I wanted to say something to defend myself, but before I could, he hung up. So there I was, sitting in the dark with my phone still in my hand, wide awake and feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. I knew Arthur was hurting. I knew he needed someone to talk to, but I also knew that if he went through with this, if he came out to his family now, it would blow up his life in a way he wasn't ready for. I just didn't know how to stop him. So later that morning, after a very necessary cup of coffee, I headed over to Arthur's place. He lives in this tiny studio apartment that always smells like old candles and whatever he tried to cook the night before. It's not much, but it's his, and he's proud of it. I knocked on the door, half hoping he'd ignore me, so I could just text him a supportive meme and call it a day. But nope. He opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept a single minute. "Hey," I said cautiously, holding up a bag of bagels like a peace offering. "Breakfast." He didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let me in. The place was a mess. Empty coffee mugs everywhere, a pile of laundry in the corner, and his laptop open on his bed with about a dozen tabs pulled up. I caught a glimpse of one that said, "How to come out to unsupportive family," before he slammed the laptop shut. "Okay," I started, setting the bagels on the counter. "Let's talk. You seemed pretty upset earlier." Arthur flopped onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. "I don't want to talk about it." "Well, too bad, because I'm here. And I brought carbs, so you're stuck with me." He let out this dramatic sigh, the kind that would have made me roll my eyes if I didn't know he was genuinely hurting. "I'm just tired, Eileen. Tired of pretending. Tired of waiting. I feel like I'm losing myself." I sat down on the edge of his bed, picking at the sleeve of my hoodie. "I get that. I do. But, Arthur, you have to think about the bigger picture here. You've made it this far, what's another 2 years? You'll get the money, and then you can do whatever you want. You can move, get surgery, start fresh. Isn't that worth waiting for?" He sat up so fast I almost fell off the bed. "Wow, okay, so you think I should just keep letting them treat me like garbage because money's more important than my dignity? Great to know where you stand, Eileen." "Arthur, that's not. Do you even hear yourself?" He interrupted, his voice rising. "You're basically telling me to sell my soul for a paycheck. Do you even care about me? Or do you just care about the fact that I might have money one day?" That stung. "Arthur, that's not fair. You know I care about you. I'm just trying to make sure you don't do something impulsive that you'll regret." He stood up and started pacing the tiny room, running his hands through his hair. "You don't get it. You've never gotten it. You've never had to deal with this kind of crap. Having your whole existence questioned, being told you're not who you are. You don't know what it's like to sit through Thanksgiving dinner while your mom prays for you to find your way back to God." And that's when I snapped. "No, Arthur, I don't know what that's like. But you know what I do know? I know what it's like to grow up without enough food in the fridge. I know what it's like to wear the same pair of shoes for 3 years because we couldn't afford new ones. I know what it's like to watch my mom work herself to death just to keep the lights on. So yeah, maybe I don't get your exact experience, but don't act like I've had it easy." He stopped pacing and just stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with it," I shot back. "You don't get how lucky you are, Arthur. You might have a shitty family, but you've always had financial stability. You've never had to wonder if you'd be able to pay rent or buy groceries. And now you have a chance to set yourself up for life, and you're willing to throw it all away because you're tired of waiting? Do you know how many people would kill for the opportunity you have?" He looked like I'd slapped him. "So you're saying I should just suck it up and keep letting them treat me like crap? That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being misgendered every day." I sighed, my anger deflating into exhaustion. "I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's strategic. You've waited this long. What's another 2 years compared to the rest of your life?" Arthur shook his head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I can't believe you right now. I thought you were supposed to be my friend. I am your friend, I said, my voice breaking a little. That's why I'm telling you the truth, even if you don't want to hear it. But he wasn't listening. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I just sat there for a while, staring at the closed door and wondering if I'd completely screwed everything up. Because yeah, maybe I'd been harsh, but I wasn't wrong. Was I? By the time I left his apartment, the bagels were cold, and my head was pounding. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to figure out if there was something I could have said differently. But no matter how I looked at it, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Arthur was making a mistake, and I wasn't going to stand by and let him ruin his life without at least trying to stop him. That night, I sat down at my laptop with a cup of tea and tried to figure out what to say. A phone call felt too risky. I didn't want to get into another shouting match. So I decided on an email. Old school, sure, but it gave me the time and space to say what I really meant without it turning into an argument. Here's what I wrote. Hey Arthur, I'm sorry for how I handled things earlier. I shouldn't have snapped at you, and I hate that we left things on such a bad note. I know you're struggling, and I should have been more compassionate instead of trying to lecture you. That said, I still think you need to slow down and think this through. I know it's not my place to tell you how to live your life, but as your friend, I just want to see you happy and secure. If you really feel like you can't wait until 25, then okay. I'll support you however I can. But if you want to stick to the original plan, maybe we could come up with ways to make it more bearable in the meantime. I can help you look for a therapist who specializes in LGBTQ+ issues, or we can brainstorm ways to set boundaries with your family without blowing things up completely. Whatever you decide, I'm here. Just don't shut me out, okay? Eileen. I hit send, feeling a little better. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and I hoped Arthur would see that I was trying. I even stayed up late, checking my email every 15 minutes like some kind of lovesick teenager waiting for a crush to text back. Finally, around dinner time the next day, I got a reply. Well, reply is a generous term. What I actually got was a wall of text that was less of a response and more of a verbal grenade. Wow, Eileen. Just wow. I don't even know where to start. Do you seriously think an email is going to fix this? You're not sorry, you're just trying to make yourself feel better because you know you were wrong. You think you're helping, but all you're doing is proving how little you actually understand. You're so cold and calculating, like this is some kind of chess game instead of my actual life. And now you're offering help? What, so you can feel like a savior or something? No thanks. Also, maybe instead of worrying about my family, you should focus on yours. Last I checked, your brother's still sick, and you're running yourself into the ground taking care of him. Maybe if you spent less time judging me and more time getting your own life together, you wouldn't come across as so pathetic. Arthur. Yeah. Ouch. I just sat there staring at my screen, my hands shaking. The comment about my brother? That one hit below the belt. For context, my little brother, Danny, has an autoimmune disorder. He's 15 and basically my entire world. But taking care of him isn't easy. Between his doctor's appointments, his medication, and trying to keep him from getting sick, it's a lot. But I do it because I love him, and to have Arthur throw that in my face, that hurt more than I can even put into words. I didn't reply, couldn't. Instead, I closed my laptop and went to find my sister, Lisa, who was in the living room watching some trashy reality show. Lisa's 21, and she has this uncanny ability to see through people's bullshit, including mine. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was her. What's up? She asked when I flopped onto the couch next to her, my face probably doing a great impression of a sad potato. Arthur, I mumbled. He basically called me a cold-hearted, judgmental bitch. Oh, and he dragged Danny into it, which was just great. Lisa muted the TV and gave me one of her patented older-than-her-years looks. Okay, start from the beginning. So I did. I told her about the phone call, the argument, the email, and the reply. By the time I was done, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. But Lisa didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked annoyed. Eileen, I'm gonna say something, and you're not gonna like it, she said, crossing her arms. Arthur's been using you. What? No, he hasn't. He's just stressed, emotional, going through a lot. She cut in. Yeah, I get that. But that doesn't give him the right to treat you like crap. Think about it. When was the last time he actually supported you? Like, really supported you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like this friendship has been pretty one-sided for a while. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words got stuck. Because she wasn't wrong. Arthur and I had always been close, but now that she mentioned it, our dynamic had definitely shifted over the past couple of years. He'd call me to vent, to ask for advice, to crash on my couch when things got tough. But when was the last time he'd asked how I was doing? When was the last time he'd offered to help with Danny or even just checked in on me? Lisa must have seen the realization dawn on my face because she softened a little. Look, I'm not saying you should cut him off completely, but you need to set some boundaries, Eileen. You can't keep pouring everything into this friendship if he's not willing to meet you halfway. It's not fair to you or to Danny. I nodded, my throat tight. She was right. I hated that she was right, but Arthur was my friend, and I loved him, but I couldn't keep letting him take and take without giving anything back. 2 years passed, and life moved on as it always does. I'd hear bits and pieces about Arthur here and there. Mutual friends would mention that he wasn't doing well, that he'd come out to his family and, as expected, had been kicked out. He lost the $2.5 million inheritance and, with it, the financial safety net he'd always counted on. At first, he was crashing on friends' couches, but that arrangement didn't last long. People have their limits, and Arthur, well, he's not exactly the easiest person to live with. He burned a lot of bridges, and eventually he ran out of places to go. Last I heard, he'd lost his job and was bouncing around, trying to figure out his next move. It was hard to hear about all of this, even from a distance. I wanted to reach out, but every time I thought about texting him or calling, I remembered the things he'd said to me, the way he'd dismissed all the ways I tried to help, the way he used my brother as a weapon against me. I knew he was hurting, but that didn't make it okay. So, I stayed quiet and focused on my own life. Danny was doing better, my part-time classes were turning into something more serious, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was actually moving forward. Then, one day, I ran into Arthur completely by chance. It was at a bus stop of all places. I was coming back from school, juggling my laptop bag and a coffee I didn't even want anymore. When I saw him sitting on the bench, he looked rough. His hair was unkempt. His clothes were wrinkled and oversized, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that made him look older than 25. I hesitated for a second, unsure if I should approach him. But he saw me before I could decide, and there was no backing out. "Eileen," he said, his voice flat. "Fancy seeing you here." "Arthur," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How've you been?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, living the dream. No home, no job, no family. Couldn't be better." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, awkwardly clutching my coffee. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, until he finally spoke again. "None of this would have happened if you had actually supported me back then," he said, his tone sharp. "You were supposed to be my friend, Eileen, but instead you tried to talk me out of standing up for myself. You told me to wait, to lie, and now look where I am." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'd been bracing for this moment ever since I'd heard about what happened to him, but that didn't make it any easier. "Arthur," I said carefully, "I'm sorry things turned out this way. I really am. But this isn't on me. You made your choice, and these are the consequences of that choice." He narrowed his eyes at me, his jaw tightening. "Wow, real nice, Eileen. Blaming me for everything. Guess you haven't changed at all." "I'm not blaming you for everything," I shot back, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm just saying I can't take responsibility for decisions you made. I tried to help you, Arthur. I gave you my honest opinion because I cared about you. You didn't want to hear it, and that's fine. But don't act like I didn't care." He stood up, slinging his worn backpack over his shoulder. "You didn't care. You were just trying to protect yourself. You didn't want to deal with the fallout if things went bad." That hit a nerve, but I forced myself to stay composed. "You don't get to rewrite history, Arthur. I was there for you. I was honest with you even when it was hard, because that's what friends do. If you can't see that, then I don't know what else to tell you." He didn't respond. He just shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. I watched him go, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because I still cared about him even after everything. Relief because, for the first time, I realized that I wasn't responsible for him. I couldn't save him from himself, no matter how much I wanted to. That night, I thought about everything that had happened over the years, about Arthur, about our friendship, about the choices we both made. And I realized something. You can love someone and still walk away. You can care about someone and still refuse to let them drag you down with them. In the end, Arthur's story was his to write. I just hoped that, someday, he'd figure out how to turn the page.